Ladies and gentlemen, I think something is happening.
I came here to give you these facts.
All right, we're going to move on into our daily topic for today, which is going to be dealing with things that are taking place with this government that you might not be aware of. So, I wanted to address this particular executive order first and foremost because I have not heard it discussed anywhere. Yet, this is an amazing, important thing that is happening. You see, there's a huge issue going on in our country that you may not be aware of with human trafficking of children, of women, of of men. It's a situation where someone is taken, enslaved, of course, against their will, and made to do things slaves would do. In some cases, they're sold into prostitution rings, and this is where you get all the discussion that's been going on about the pedogate, the pedophilia that's taking place, the Pizzagate, and all these other ideologies you're hearing going on. There's a real sick, twisted element in our society that is hurting young children and hurting women, and it needs to stop. And we're not hearing about this on the mainstream media, but this executive order that I'm going to read here is the executive order that was signed by President Trump probably within a minute after Jeff Sessions was sworn in on February 9th, I believe it was. Here it is. February 9th, Presidential Executive Order on enforcing federal law with respect to transnational criminal organizations and preventing international trafficking. By the authority vested in me as the President, by the Constitution and the laws of the United States of America, it is hereby orders as follows. Section 1, the purpose. Transnational criminal organizations and subsidiary organizations, including transnational drug cartels, have spread throughout the nation, threatening the safety of the United States and its citizens. These organizations derive revenue through widespread illegal conduct, including acts of violence and abuse that exhibit a wanton disregard for human life. They, for example, have been known to commit brutal murders, rapes, and other barbaric acts. These groups are drivers of crime, corruption, violence, and misery. In particular, the trafficking by cartels of controlled substances has triggered a resurgence in deadly drug abuse and a corresponding rise in violent crime related to drugs. Likewise, the trafficking and smuggling of human beings by transnational criminal groups risks creating a humanitarian crisis. These crimes, along with many others, are enriching and empowering these organizations to the detriment of the American people. A comprehensive and decisive approach is required to dismantle these organized crime syndicates and restore safety for the American people. Section 2, Policy. It shall be the policy of the executive branch to strengthen enforcement of federal law in order to thwart transnational criminal organizations and subsidiary organizations, including criminal gangs, cartels, racketeering organizations, and other groups engaged in illicit activities that present a threat to public safety and national security and that are related to, for example, 1. The illegal smuggling and trafficking of humans, drugs, and other substances, wildlife, and weapons. 2. Corruption, cybercrime, fraud, financial crimes, and intellectual property theft. Or 3. Illegal concealment of transfer of proceeds delivered from such illicit activities. B. To ensure that the federal government agencies give a priority to devote sufficient resources to efforts to identify, interdict, disrupt, and dismantle transnational criminal organizations and subsidiary organizations, including through the investigation, apprehension, and prosecution of members of such organizations, the extradition of members of such organizations to face justice in the United States, and where appropriate, and to the extent permitted by law, the swift removal from the United States of foreign nationals who are members of such organizations. C. Maximize the extent to which all federal agencies share information and coordinate with federal law enforcement agencies as permitted by law in order to identify, interdict, and dismantle transnational criminal organizations and subsidiary organizations. D. Enhance cooperations with foreign counterparts against transnational criminal organizations and subsidiary organizations, including, where appropriate and permitted by law, through sharing of intelligence and law enforcement information and through increased security sector assistance to foreign partners by the Attorney General and Secretary of Homeland Security. E. Develop strategies under the guidance of the Secretary of State the Attorney General and the Secretary of Homeland Security to maximize coordination among agencies, such as through the Organized Crime Drug Enforcement Task Force, the Special Operations Division, the OCDETF, Fusion Center, and the International Organized Crime Intelligence and Operations Center to counter the crimes described in subsection A of this section consistent with the applicable federal law. And F, pursue and support additional efforts to prevent the operational success of transnational criminal organizations and subsidiary organizations within and beyond the United States, to include the prosecution of ancillary criminal offenses such as immigration, fraud, and visa fraud, and the seizure and the implementation of such organizations and forfeiture of the proceeds of their criminal activity. Section 3, implementation. In furtherance of the policy set forth in Section 2 of this order, the Secretary of State, the Attorney General, the Secretary of Homeland Security, and the Director of National Intelligence or their designees shall co-chair and direct the existing interagency threat migration working group, which shall A, work to support and improve the coordination of federal agencies' efforts to identify, interdict, investigate, prosecute, and dismantle transnational criminal organizations and subsidiary organizations within and beyond the United States. B, to improve federal agencies' provision, collection, reporting, and sharing of, and access to data relevant to federal efforts against the transnational criminal organizations and subsidiary organizations. C, to increase intelligence and law enforcement information sharing with foreign partners, banning transnational criminal organizations and subsidiary organizations, and to enhance international operational capabilities and cooperation. D, assess federal agencies' allocation of monetary and personal resources for identifying, interdicting, and dismantling transnational criminal organizations and subsidiary organizations, as well as any resources that should be redirected towards these efforts. E, identify federal agencies' practices, any absence of practices, and the funding needs that might hinder the federal efforts to effectively combat transnational criminal organizations, subsidiary organizations. F, review relevant federal laws to determine existing ways in which identity, interdict, and disrupt the activity of transnational criminal organizations and subsidiary organizations, and ascertain which statutory authorities, including provisions under the Immigration and Nationality Act, could be better enforced or amended to prevent foreign members of these organizations or their associates from obtaining entry into the United States and from exploiting the United States immigration system. The interest of the the interest and transparency of public safety and in compliance with all applicable laws, including the Privacy Act, issue reports at least once per quarter detailing convictions in the United States relating to transnational criminal organizations and their subsidiaries. H, to the extent deemed useful by the co-chairs and the discretion, identify methods for federal agencies to coordinate as permitted by law with state, tribal, and local governments and law enforcement agencies, foreign law enforcement partners, public health agencies, and non-governmental organizations in order to aid in the identification, interdiction, and dismantling of transnational criminal organizations and subsidiary organizations. I, to the extent deemed useful by the co-chairs and the discretion, consult with the Office of National Drug Control Policy in implementing this order. And J, within 120 days of the date of this order, submit to the President a report on transnational criminal organizations and subsidiary organizations, including the extent of penetration of such organizations into the United States, and issue additional reports annually thereafter to describe the progress made in combating these criminal organizations, along with any recommended actions for dismantling them. Section 4, General Provisions. A, nothing in this order shall be construed to impair or otherwise affect 1, the authority granted by law to an executive department or agency or the head thereof, or 2, the function of the Director of the Office of Management and Budget relating to the budgetary, administrative, or legislative proposals. B, this order shall be implemented consistent with applicable law and subject to the availability of appropriations. And C, this order is not intended to and does not create any right or benefit, substantive or procedural, enforceable at law, or in equity by any party against the United States, its departments, agencies, or entities, officers, employees, agents, or any other purposes. Signed, Donald J. Trump. Very important, okay? Very important. Do you know that, and there's probably more of a count going on, but I know that there's been at least 1,500 pedophiles that have been arrested across the United States since Donald Trump took office. I know that you're not hearing about it in the mainstream media, but it's out there. I'm going to collect this information on it, and I'm going to bring this to you in a future show so that you can see what's going on. This is a big deal. This protects our children. This protects the women. This protects the young boys. This protects anybody that is preyed upon. And why there would be anybody in America that would stand up against this is completely ludicrous. And I would say that that person, then, if they're against this, is obviously complicit in this type of activity going on. So I wanted you to be aware, spread the word that pedophiles are getting arrested, that human trafficking is being stopped, and it's happening. So while you're hearing all of the other stuff going on and all the other babbling that the mainstream media is doing about things, behind the scenes, some real important work is taking place. And I just wanted to make sure that you know that this is what's taking place and this is what we're protecting our country from human traffickers that are out there hurting American citizens. It's got to end, and this executive order is going a long way to make that happen. That's it for our daily topic. I'll be back. Stay tuned.